and will be posted on the New York Sun webpage. So once again, this is the program update for New York Sun for commercial industrial. And once again, I am Max Joel, the program manager. Next slide, please. So today I'll be giving a brief introduction to the updates to the program. Then my colleague Candace Rossi will be discussing the additional upstate megawatt blocks that have been added, as well as some updates to the Brownfield and Landfill adder. After that, Luke Forster will walk us through the upstate community adder and the process for receiving that. Then at the end, we will do Q&A. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the most important update today, as many of you know, is that New York Sun has been extended to 2025 with a new target of 6 gigawatts distributed solar installed statewide. That, of course, is a update from 3 gigawatts by 2023. This is a new target that was mandated by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And just last month, we received an order from the Public Service Commission granting New York Sun the additional $573 million budget that we feel is necessary to meet this new target. So since receiving that order, we've updated our program operating plan, revised all the program manuals, made updates to the program dashboards that we all rely on to keep track of available capacity. Some emails have gone out to that effect, but the link is here as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So one element of the expanded 6 gigawatt program that I do want to touch on before we dive into the details is the solar energy equity framework. This is another element that's mandated by the CLCPA. This new funding focuses on benefits to disadvantaged communities, as well as LMI households, affordable housing, and environmental justice communities. The program now has $135 million dedicated fund that will be used to leverage no less than $65 million in additional base incentives, meaning that the minimum investment that NYSERDA will be making in solar for disadvantaged communities and these different areas over the next 5 years will be $200 million. So we won't be able to, we're not introducing every single new element all at once. Some updates to existing LMI adders have already been made. Those are the residential and multifamily affordable housing adders in the residential and non-residential program. So they'll be covered in detail on this afternoon's webinar. Other programs that were included in our petition to the Public Service Commission and the order, such as a new adder for LMI community solar, are in development, and a complete stakeholder process will get underway very shortly. So that's all the information that we'll be discussing about this element of the program on today's webinar, because we'll be focusing on the current updates and mechanics. But please keep this in mind. This will be a very important part of future program revisions, and we will be reaching out to stakeholders to help contribute. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Candace Rossi.
Thanks, Max. So my name is Candace Rossi, and I'm a project manager on the New York Sun team. I'm going to briefly go over the new upstate commercial industrial blocks that are part of the 6 gigawatt expansion and are now live. The structure of the new blocks is similar as they take a step-down approach, but the capacity of the blocks are much larger in comparison to the older blocks. As you are probably all aware, Block 15 had already launched with a capacity of 410 megawatts at 15 cents per watt. We've also established Block 16 at the same amount of capacity of 410 megawatts, but at the rate of 13 cents per watt. and Block 17 has 415 megawatts of capacity at the rate of 11 cents per watt. The blocks are currently live on the dashboard page, which can be accessible from the link on the slide, and as you know, are updated in real time. All right, next slide, please. Now I'll briefly talk about the Brownfield and Landfill adder updates. There has been some notable changes in this adder. Specifically, the adder is increasing from 10 cents per watt to 15 cents per watt. The eligibility criteria has also changed. The previous rules allowed for project sites where development was deterred due to contaminants, but were not part of any DEC or EPA database to be eligible for the adder. Moving forward, this will no longer be the case. Only projects that are listed as brownfields or landfills by either the DEC or EPA will now be eligible. Additionally, the eligibility form that was previously used will no longer be required. Instead, documentation must be uploaded with the submission displaying the site code number from the database. A preferred example of this would be a screenshot of the listing in the database. Next slide, please. And with those updates, I'll pass it over to Luke Forrester.
Thank you, Candace. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we hear you great.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Great,
thanks. I'll launch into this. So as part of that $573 million budget expansion, we requested and received about $111 million for the community adder. The community adder is the successor to the community credit and the MTC. It's a specific incentive available for community solar projects only. I say community solar because the community credit and MTC were available for other technologies as well, such as fuel cells and wind, but the community adder is specific to solar projects and solar projects paired with energy storage. We're structuring it as a declining block structure. The first block is 250 megawatts DC at 22 cents a watt. After that, there will be another 200 megawatts at 18 cents per watt. There will be a third block, but the size and the rate for that are to be determined. Please note that this is sized in megawatts DC, whereas the community credit and the MTC were sized in megawatts AC. So please keep that in mind. The community adder can be combined with other New York Sun incentive adders. So for instance, you could receive the base incentive, the community adder, and the landfill adder on a given project if it qualified for each of those. The payout schedule for the community adder is going to be the same as the base incentive, 50% at project completion and PTO, and then 25% at the end of year 1 and at the end of year 2. We have a new dashboard that's pulling information live from the Salesforce database. So that will be updated immediately whenever a new project is pulled in. That's unlike the old dashboard, which was updated twice per month. So you'll see a bit more accuracy and timeliness on that. I'll show you a screenshot of that dashboard in just a moment. Please keep in mind we already have an existing community adder for Orange and Rockland and Central Hudson. That will be unchanged for those two utilities, with the exception that we've added an additional 30 megawatts DC to the Central Hudson dashboard. I'd also like to point out that these blocks are shared between the commercial industrial program and the non-residential program as well. So I know today's call is mostly developers focusing on the megawatt scale projects, but projects under 750 megawatts, under 750 kilowatts in the non-residential program will be pulling against the same blocks. We have more details on these program requirements and how the community adder works in the updated program manual. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we qualify for this community adder? It's intended for projects that missed out on the community credit in the MTC. So we know that currently NYSEG and National Grid have fully allocated their community credit and now have a wait list of projects. So those projects that did not qualify for community credit will be eligible for the community adder. Projects will lock in their community adder when they submit the full project application to New York Sun. If you have an existing project that's already been submitted for New York Sun for the base incentive, and that project is CDG, and it didn't qualify for community credit or MTC, you can get the community adder on that. We can add that on as a project update or a project modification. Conversely, let's say you submit a project, it receives the community adder, and then at a later date, that project becomes eligible for the community credit through the utility. You can switch, you can take that community credit, but you would lose the community adder. And we are currently in the process of reaching out to developers that already submitted projects to New York Sun and are on the community credit wait list. So you may receive a call or an email from Alison Nelligan or Candace Rossi confirming where you're at with a project and if you want to move ahead with locking in that community adder. Let's do the next slide, please. And this is a screenshot of the new community adder dashboard. You can access it in the same section of the New York Sun website that shows you the megawatt block dashboard. On the left, there's a little link that says community adder. And we've got three. I'm just showing two here because that's all that fit on the slide. But we have three of these. They look a little bit like speedometers. One for the new blocks, which are servicing National Grid, NYSEG, and RG&E. And then we have a separate dashboard for Central Hudson and a third one for Orange and Rockland. It's pretty intuitive. As more projects are submitted, that curve will slowly turn green until it's full. And the dashboard provides the total number of kilowatts submitted and the total number of kilowatts remaining in that block. We've got a link to that dashboard on the bottom of the slide. You'll be able to access that once these slides are posted online following this call. That's all I have for the community adder. So let's move on to the next slide. And we can open it up for questions and answers. If you have a question, please submit it online through the WebEx Q&A box, and we will respond to that. Thank you.
Max, I don't know if you're on mute. All right. Thank you for. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Shyam Mehta here from NYSERDA. Just wondering if you want to lead here with a few questions, and then others could weigh in as well.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Shyam. We were going to lead, I think, with the questions that you had collected, and then we were going to go into the questions that are coming in from the chat. So, Shyam, if you'd like to go first, we can go with those questions, and then go to Dave Gall and Eric Kadowski. And I would encourage those who are submitting questions to continue to add those, and then we're going to transition over to those that are coming in live. So, Shyam, if you're ready to go, I'll hand over the mic to you, and then we can get started from there and continue to consolidate the questions that are coming in.
Sure, that sounds great. So first of all, just want to thank Max and Candace and Luke and the rest of the NYSERDA team for putting the webinar together. I think this is, as you have been doing over the past couple of months with the regular flow of information, it's been very timely and appreciated by the industry. So I had a few questions, mostly relating to the community credit and adder, and then I believe my trade association colleagues also have a few questions there as well. So just starting with a quick question on the dashboard that Luke just showed. So just want to clarify that, that dashboard just went to the live website, and that shows a current allocation of 0 megawatts, just like the picture that Luke showed. But I do understand that a large portion of that 22-cent a watt adder is already spoken for by the projects. So could you just speak to that and give us an update on what the current status of the allocation with respect to that 22-cent a watt adder is for the 250 megawatt DC block?
Yes, happy to do so. You're correct. If you look at that dashboard, you'll see that today there are 0 kilowatts subscribed in that 22-cent block. There are a pretty good number of projects that have been submitted to New York Sun already that are on the community credit wait list, meaning that they could get the community adder. I don't have the exact number on my fingertips, but it's more than half, but less than 100% of the block size. So most of that initial block at 22 cents will go to projects that have already submitted to New York Sun. We don't know exactly how many, because that will depend on how many projects fall out or attrit out of the utility community credits block.
Got it. Thanks, Luke. And so just in terms of managing expectations, when do you think we could expect to see that be reflected on the dashboard itself?
We're currently in the process of reaching out to developers that are already on that wait list. I'm not exactly sure how long it will take to contract and put all of those projects, through our accounting system and send out updated award letters. But we're working on that as quickly as we can. So that'll be an ongoing process. Candace or Allison, if you'd like to venture a time frame estimate, feel free to do so.
This is Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I would say it's going to be at least 2 to 3 weeks. Our goal is to actually get the projects in Salesforce updated, showing the community adder, but it will take some time to route the award letters and get them through our financial system. So you'll most likely see them in Salesforce much faster, but the actual award letters, I would say, give us at least 2 to 3 weeks. Hopefully we can get them out sooner, but that's at least safe to say of when you'll actually see the new award letter.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So my next question is regarding the community adder allocation for Central HUD and ORU that Luke just went through. So basically, the question is that once the allocation for both those territories, which is specific to those territories right now, is exhausted, will any subsequent projects not, is that the entire allocation for those two territories, or will or following the exhaustion of or allocation of that capacity, will projects in those territories still be able to avail of the community adder by being in the larger pool of the upstate blocks, the 250 megawatt at 22 cents and 200 megawatts at 18 cents?
Yeah, so the intention is that the new blocks of 250 megawatts and 200 megawatts are for all utilities that have fully used up their currently available community credit and community adder. So my read is that if and when, the Central Hudson and Orange and Rockland community adder tranches close out, projects in those utilities could then submit to these new blocks.
Got it. Thanks, Luke. And then my last question is just to confirm that with regard to locking in the community adder, I think you just went over this, but I just want to ask this question just to make it clear for folks who are on the webinar, that to lock in the adder, unlike the community credit, which only required making the 25% deposit payment, the eligibility criteria or the lock-in criteria are both the 25% deposit as well as securing local approvals, just like the base megawatt block incentive. Is that right?
That's correct. So we're looking for the full application to New York Sun, including proof of 25% utility payment, as well as the non-ministerial permit approvals. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It's a different qualification criteria than the community credit and the MTC work. It's a higher milestone requirement. That, of course, has pros and cons, but that will help prevent a big flood of projects coming in on day one. I know there are a lot of questions and a lot of anxiety about how long these blocks will last, but that will partially be determined by the rate at which permits are approved.
Understood. Thank you, Luke. And that concludes my question, so happy to pass the mic on to my trade association counterparts.
Thank you very much, Shyam. And I think we can switch this over to Erica if you're ready to go next.
Yeah, thanks. Just confirming that you can hear me?
Yep,
Can hear you.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Echoing Shyam's thanks to the team for putting this together. It's very helpful for us as the trades and for our members as well. So you covered the fact that projects, this is also just a confirmation question, that projects that are initially eligible in lock-in community adder, they can and are getting pushed up into receiving community credit. Can you talk a little bit more about the mechanics of that switch, like how exactly that works? It sounds like you are doing notification now, but what are the mechanics of that switching from one to the other?
Okay, so the question, if I heard this right, is essentially how do you switch from community adder to community credit if need be?
Yep, that's right.
Yep. So the underlying premise here is that the community credit is generally going to be richer than the community adder. And we may have a few more megawatts of community credit trickling into the utility tranches as projects cancel out. So we thought about that, and our solution was essentially NYSERDA will agree to give a project a community adder if it qualifies. If that project later on qualifies for the community credit, for instance, if a project ahead of it in a queue, canceled out, we will let that project get the community credit instead. We have a pretty good data sharing situation going on with utilities. We can track projects by CSER number. So each 2 weeks, we get an update from the utilities about which projects are in which tranche and are on the wait list. So it's pretty easy for us to see, if the new project has been pulled in to community credit tranche 2. If that happens, we'll talk to the developer and we'll say, do you want the community credit? And if they say yes, then we'll go ahead and we'll remove the community adder from the project in the Salesforce database. I assume we would send out an updated award letter at that time showing the updated amount. If for some reason a project wants to keep the community adder and forego the community credit, we could honor that as well. But the idea is we want to give projects the flexibility to, upgrade, so to speak.
Thanks for that. That's helpful clarification. And following up, for how long will projects on the community credit wait list be able to proceed with the credit if it becomes available before all projects are sort of transitioned to the community adder? I think this has to do with a prior order around the recycling reallocation end date, but if you could address that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, could you ask that again? What was the question for how long will the utilities be recycling community credit?
Yeah, so how long, is the end date for being able to get community credit if you're on the wait list?
Okay, so my understanding is that the order that opened up community credit tranche 2 basically said that it would be open for, to use the word recycling, for 6 months, meaning that if another project dropped out of community credit or MTC, those megawatts would be put back into community credit tranche 2. My understanding is the order approved that for 6 months, which would bring us to November. And then everything got pushed out another 6 months in that COVID-related delay. So I believe that brings us to May. Whether or not DPS extends that again is going to be up to them.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Right. Yeah.
One final question. If you have community adder locked in and then you're pulled up to the community credit, assuming a developer wishes to be pulled up to the community credit, what happens to that community adder capacity? Is it reallocated, or what happens to it?
Yes, we'll reallocate it. If the current block is still open, we'll just put those dollars and those megawatts back in that block. If, for instance, a project cancels out of block 1 and we're on block 2 now, we would put that money back in block 2 or block 3. But the idea is that, we have $111 million. We will spend that on community adder. If a project cancels, we're not going to, allocate that money to something else. It will be spent on community adder.
Max, this is David. Can you just verify that answer? Because I believe that there's another answer to that. Is that true?
I believe Luke's answer is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's all the questions from CCSA. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Erica. And so now we'll switch us over to Dave Gall at SIA. Dave, let me know that your audio is working.
Hi, thank you. I think all the questions I had have already been asked by CCSA and NYSERDA, so I'm going to yield my time and you can get to the questions from the audience.
Thanks, Dave. And thank you all for providing the input and the feedback from the industry groups. We really appreciate your participation in these webinars. And so now, I guess unless Max or David Sandbank, if you wanted to say anything, I think we're just going to take a minute to consolidate some of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A before we jump into those right there. So give us a minute, and we'll kick off the live Q&A session. Thank you all for your patience. All right, so we've got a lot of questions that are coming in, and we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. This is Chris Rogers. I'm a project manager at New York Sun. And so what I'm going to do with the NYSERDA team is I'm just going to go through the list and see if we can hop through these. And so I think we will start off with a question about question number 3. Max, I don't know if you can take that question about the proposed changes or any changes to off-takers receiving credits from multiple solar arrays.
Certainly, thanks, Chris. So the question points out that currently an individual community solar subscriber can only receive credits from one source, and the question is about whether that can or will be changed. So those are the rules set by the Public Service Commission in the Community Distributed Generation Regulations. So that's not something that NYSERDA can address directly, and I don't really have any information on it, but it's certainly a question that you could refer to the Department of Public Service staff.
Thanks, Max. And as another quick housekeeping note, there was a question about whether or not there will be a transcription of this webinar. There will not be a transcription, although there will be closed captions on the recording that will be uploaded. And so I'm going to move on to the next question about brownfields and community adders. And Candace, if you can take that question.
Yeah, we got a question if the brownfield adder is available for all C&I projects, regardless of size and type. That is correct. The brownfield adder is available for all ground-mounted commercial industrial projects, as well as ground-mounted non-residential projects.
Thanks, Candace. So moving on down, we'll try to get through these as quickly as we can. Luke, I don't know if you want to take a question. We kind of had a series of questions about the community adder, specifically about the new capacity that will be added for Central Hudson. And so, Luke, if you can, maybe it'd be helpful to restate what the eligibility requirements. You covered some of that with Erica about qualifications for the community adder and community credit, and then about the new capacity that will be added in Central Hudson as opposed to other utility regions.
Yeah, Chris, I see we have about a half dozen semi-related questions. If you don't mind, I'll just try to run through them all in a batch here. So the first question here is, will there be new community credit tranches or community adder tranches for non-solar technologies? Not that we know of. That would essentially be up to the Public Service Commission. The community adder is specific to solar projects and solar coupled with storage projects. The community credit is open for a number of different technologies like small hydro, wind, and fuel cells. Realistically, just about all of the community credit, especially in NYSEG and National Grid, went for solar. Moving on. In order to qualify for the community adder, do projects need to already have a number of customers subscribed before applying for the adder? The answer is no, they do not. NYSERDA doesn't have a requirement regarding how quickly you subscribe your off-takers. The next question, is block 1 of the community adder already filled up? No, we took a look at how many projects were already submitted to NYSERDA that might qualify for it. And it is not enough to fully subscribe that block 1. It will take up perhaps most of the block, but not the entire block. It will not be closed by projects already in our queue. So we talked about how we opened up 2 new blocks of community adder that will be available for NYSEG and National Grid, and soon to be RG&E. That'll be available soon. On top of that, we're putting an additional 30 megawatts of capacity in the Central Hudson community adder. That 30 million was kind of squeezed out of that original budget we had for Central Hudson and ONR. There is no new capacity for ONR. It's going to Central Hudson here. The community adder is an upfront payment, so it's not part of the value stack revenue. As such, it's not going to be included in the value stack calculator. So all the upfront incentives, be they community adder, New York Sun incentive, or your tax credits or depreciation are not included in the value stack calculator. That calculator is for the ongoing value stack revenue. That being said, we will have an update to the value stack calculator coming out, I believe the next few days with various updates. I'll take one last question from the pile here. We talked a little bit about how eligibility for the community adder is different from eligibility for the community credit. In order to lock in your community credit or your MTC, you made your 25% utility upgrade payment. However, to qualify for the community adder, it's a higher maturity requirement. It's the same requirements as applying for the New York Sun base incentive, namely making your 25% utility upgrade and having your non-ministerial permits in hand, so your zoning and planning permits. So in other words, once you apply for the New York Sun base incentive, you simultaneously are applying for the community adder. It's going to be the one submittal that covers both of them. Okay, Chris, I'm gonna pass the mic back to you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate going through those questions. And we're seeing there were a lot of questions about the community adder and community credit, and I hope that provides some more clarity on that. There's one other follow-up question about the effective date of the new adder. Candace, I'm not sure if you clarified that in the earlier Brownfield question. If you can just clarify, that's question 16.
Yeah, so the new adder is effective already. So if you apply into the program today, you'll be receiving that 15 cents per watt. There was also another question regarding brownfields, that are brownfield opportunity areas eligible for the adder? So in regard to that, the site within that opportunity area would still need to be listed as a brownfield or a landfill by the DEC or EPA. The brownfield opportunity area alone would not be sufficient to receive the adder.
Thanks, Candace. And so there's one question that I want to get to, Max, about the rollout of the low to moderate income programs and incentives. There will be more details on some changes to the adders in the follow-up presentation focusing on the residential and non-residential programs and expansion. And Max, I don't know if this is number 22, if you wanted to talk more broadly about the planned rollout and timeline.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And it looks like the questions are specific to the low and moderate income adder for community solar that was included in the New York Sun petition and order. We do not have an exact timeline and target date for this, but the stakeholder and program development process will be running this summer and fall. That will involve, in addition to direct stakeholder engagement, a request for information, sort of straw proposal type process. So everyone will have a chance to get a look at what NYSERDA is considering for this adder and provide direct feedback. The one other thing I'll note about that is a really important part of this program development process will be data collection related to current LMI uptake. That's something we already have to some extent, but plan to be engaging the industry on further as we shape this new program. Oh, and I'll add, there was a specific question about could a project be eligible both for a LMI CDG adder and the community adder? The answer is yes, those would stack or be integrated in some way or another. It wouldn't be a kind of a pick or choose situation in the current program concept.
Thanks, Max. just going to give just take a minute to consolidate some of the questions that have come in, and we'll continue with this. And I did want to confirm there was a question about, will the rest of the presentation just be Q&A? That is correct. The remainder of this presentation will be to get through questions specifically about the program changes that were previously mentioned and are part of the planned expansion of the commercial and industrial program.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time, please?
Just to clarify that the remainder of the presentation is just about the Q&A. There are no further presentation slides.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Chris, I can take a few more questions. When are the new tranches being implemented, or are all of them live now? So the new megawatt blocks are currently live, and the new community adder offering is live. We expect it'll take us a few weeks to reach out to all of the projects currently in the New York Sun queue that would qualify for community adder. We're doing that, and we expect that would take most, but not all, of the initial 22 cent per watt block.
I will also cherry pick a question I'm seeing. There's a question about a requirement in the first filed New York Sun operating plan that only projects that paid their 25% interconnection payment prior to May 14th would be eligible for the Tranche 1 community adder. That was in fact an error in the operating plan. We refiled a few days later with that reference removed. So the qualification is just as Luke described, the regular New York Sun qualification process, and projects will be given the community adder in the order in which they qualify through the New York Sun process. The 25% payment date is other than that, of course, is a requirement to qualify for the New York Sun process. The date at which that was made is not the qualifying factor.
So there's another clarifying questions about any changes to downstate incentives specifically to the Con Edison region. And the question is, will there be any changes to specific to the Con Edison region and the incentive structures? And I believe that Luke has gone through that related to the community adder. And Luke, feel free to jump in to correct me if I'm wrong, but there are not changes to, or Luke, actually, I'll just pause. Luke, if you can jump in and clarify if there are any community adder or credit changes to Con Edison.
No, so we're not introducing new megawatt blocks in Con Ed at this time. And Con Ed already has well over 100 megawatts of community credit remaining through the utility. So it's not necessary to implement a community adder. So no changes there in Con Ed, either in terms of community adder or base incentive. I'll take another question. So the community adder is going to be based on a number of megawatts, 250 megawatts in the first block, 200 megawatts in the second block, and the final block is going to be determined. It's not based on a fixed calendar, so we don't have like an expected closing date on that. It'll be similar to the megawatt block program. As soon as all of the money is allocated, the offering will close.
I was wondering if you could Yeah, and I feel like you're doing the, you know, the yeoman's work here answering these questions about the community credit adder. There's a lot of questions that are coming in related to how long folks will be on the wait list for the community credit and how there will be communications related to opening of the second tranches or of subsequent tranches of the community credit. And you know, I think the point to emphasize there is that the dashboard that we have on our website will be updated regularly to provide information on the opening of new tranches, and you know, we're attempting to be as responsive as possible. But I don't know if you, I don't think we can predict as to, you know, what the velocity of the closing, the filling up of these tranches will be. And I think the answer about how long you'll be on the wait list, Luke, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, that's ultimately going to depend on how many projects, you know, fall out of the utility, community credit, and MTC queue over the next 6+ months. We know that there were already, I think it was around 30 megawatts each for NYSEG and National Grid. That was the initial basis of opening those tranches. We do have a copy of the wait lists on the NYSERDA VEDR website. You can take a look at that and just get a sense of how many projects are on the wait list for each of those utilities. You can take a look at the submittal dates, but we don't really have an estimate on how many additional projects will drop out of the community credit tranche.
Thanks, Luke. So we're still going through questions here, and we'll try to get through the unanswered ones. Some of these are repeats, but we're going to try to get through as many as we can within the allotted time.
There was one question, question 28, where I think the person asking the question was trying to do the math and add up the megawatt blocks 15, 16, and 17, and they saw a different number, a different dollar number than what was filed in our petition. And I just want to clarify the block 14, the 17-cent per watt block, was part of that same budget that we requested. We opened and actually closed that block before the budget was approved. We temporarily pulled in dollars from somewhere else to cover that. But that block 14 was part of the expansion.
Thanks, Luke. There's a question here about potential changes in access to RECs, question number 29. David or Max, I don't know if I can reread this, but I'm not sure if you're aware of any potential changes. This is maybe on point here.
Yeah, I do say that there. So the question is whether there would be a change to the way renewable energy credits or you know, the E-value would be handled for community solar projects in New York City specifically. The questioner notes that as of right now, the community solar cannot be used for the purposes of local law 97, which getting too deep into the details and into kind of New York City issues is a requirement for offsetting greenhouse gas footprint. So there is no plan on the NYSERDA end to adjust how those things are handled. That is of course a regulatory issue, rests with the Public Service Commission. So, you know, I would probably sort of redirect that question either to the Department of Public Service or to to New York City, and something worth discussing with your contacts in city government, or yeah, just to get clarification there.
Thanks, Max. There's another question here about RG&E service territory. And the question is, Luke, if you can answer this, is will I be able to qualify for the community credit in tranche 2, or is the RG&E being immediately going to the community adder?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's currently, I think, like 4 megawatts left in RG&E's community credit 2. So that's obviously not a lot. You know, that could be a single project. But once that fills up, they will be able to take the community adder. But we wanted to put RG&E on that dashboard just in anticipation of the community credit closing very, very soon, and then moving to community adder.
Chris, I see a few questions
Thank
about
you.
energy storage and the LMI adders, which I can address. So there were a couple questions that referenced the intention made in the New York Sun petition and operating plan to have extra incentives for solar projects serving LMI customers and potentially affordable housing that were paired with storage. So first, I'll clarify that intention is focused on on-site systems, so not necessarily PV that would qualify under the commercial industrial program or the non-residential program. And second, that program is a little bit further out in development for a number of reasons. I think, as most people are aware on this call, the retail energy storage incentives are all committed for upstate, and there remain significant permitting and local approval barriers to energy storage in New York City. I will note that we do currently have a LMI adder for the Long Island residential energy storage, which is the only current residential energy storage program. We will be giving some updates on that in the residential program webinar later this afternoon. And just on that note, I did see a question just on our definition of residential versus non-residential versus commercial industrial. To clarify that, none of those definitions have changed in these updates. They are, remain the same for at least the last couple of years. So residential projects is for 1 to 4 family homes. I believe it's capped at 25 kW. We define non-residential for the upstate program as up to 750 kW. Downstate, we just consider all commercial or non-residential projects as non-residential, and up to the cap of 7.5 megawatts DC. So our commercial industrial program is for upstate projects between 750 kW and 7.5 megawatts DC. There was a question about whether we are considering raising that 7.5 megawatt DC cap. I believe the answer is no. We're pretty comfortable with that.
Thanks, Max. So one question I saw that came in was about the planned LMI adders. Max referenced earlier that we'd be discussing these in the residential non-residential program webinar. And the question is whether or not there are LMI adders considered for the commercial industrial sector if they're in the works, but they haven't been established yet. I guess I can clarify that the current LMI adders are only for the residential and non-residential program. And there was Max, there was a follow-up question, and clarify if I'm wrong on this, but it's a question about modifying the small commercial segment to increase the eligibility of project size to 1 megawatt or greater. That would be I believe we're talking about the non-residential sector, and I think to echo the question, I guess earlier about lifting the cap from 7.5 megawatts, that there are not considerations on increasing that at this time.
That's correct. We're not considering raising that.
And so there's Luke, you've been answering so many of these questions here, and you've been the star of the show. And there's another question, or a couple of questions. One about the payment schedule for the community adder, as well as I guess a question about the timing of projects that made their interconnection payment before May 14th. And Luke, if you can take those, that's 33 and 34.
I will do that. I love the sound of my own voice. I'll keep on answering these. So the Block 1 community adder, the 22 cents per watt, is open to projects that made their 25% payment before or after May 14th. So if you've got a project now and you make your 25% payment tomorrow and you get your permits really quickly, you could conceivably get that 22-cent rate. So the payout of the community adder is going to be exactly the same as the base New York Sun incentive. So for a commercial industrial program project, the incentive payout is 50% at PTO, then 25% at the end of year 1, 25% at the end of year 2. If the system underperforms in terms of kilowatt hours per year, we would derate those year 1 and year 2 payments proportionately. That's covered in the program manual, but again, it's going to be the same payout rules for the community adder and for the base. By contrast, if you have a project coming through the non-residential program, it's community solar, it's less than 750 kilowatts, that's just 100% at PTO for both the base incentive and the community adder. One more question. Yes, you can take the community adder as well as the brownfield adder on a given project. You can stack them and take both.
Thanks, Luke. There was one other question that I was asking for, I think, for some clarity on the low to moderate income incentive adders. I would encourage all of those who are interested in finding more details to join the webinar, which we will also be recording. It starts at 3 p.m. The announcement or the registration link for that was in the same link for the commercial and industrial adder, or excuse me, webinar, expansion webinar. And we'll be going into more details about those added incentives for single-family residential as well as non-residential multifamily housing projects. So I think the focus of this webinar here should be on commercial and industrial and expansion of that program, the community credit, community adder, the brownfield adders as well. So let's try to keep that focus there.
And someone pointed out that if you take a look at the NYSERDA Value Stack website, it says that there are 124 megawatts in the Rochester Gas and Electric Community Credit 2. That's a typo. That should be 12 megawatts, not 124 megawatts. I just put in a marketing work order to correct that typo. Again, it's another reason we're glad to be moving towards an automated dashboard that's going to pull in the correct numbers automatically. So I apologize for that typo.
Thanks, Luke. And I did see a question about, just one follow-up about the solar plus storage adders. We are constantly adapting our incentives to what we believe will expand the market. And so we're certainly open for discussions about how we can improve the incentive structure or the incentive structure that's in place right now. But as part of this expansion, that does not include any wholesale changes to what the storage incentives are. Another question about Long Island, inquiring whether or not the changes to the commercial and industrial program will impact PSEG Long Island at all. I believe the answer to that question is, I believe you're correct. There are not changes related to the community adder community credit that would impact PSEG Long Island service territory. And see that the questions are coming in a little bit slower now, and so we're going to make sure that we consolidate these and we try to address as many unasked questions as possible. There have been some follow-ups, and so we're going to try to get through unique questions as opposed to maybe focusing on one particular topic. And so we'll try to get through those and try to get to those shortly.
I see another question related to the May 14th deadline. Again, there is May 14th deadline related to eligibility for the community adder. That was an error in the first filing of the operating plan that has been corrected. Eligibility for the community adder or securing the community adder comes when the project is approved for New York Sun incentives, and the two main pieces of that are having paid that 25% payment, that you could have received confirmation for making that payment right before clicking submit on the New York Sun application, or it could have come earlier. It's that plus having obtained all necessary local approvals for the project. But again, the actual trigger is submitting that complete application to New York Sun. So there's no cutoff date related to payment of the 25%.
Thanks, Max. And also, we'll add in links to, we can add in the link to the Con Edison and the Upstate program manuals to this presentation. So that will be included when this presentation goes live and is uploaded, is uploaded to the NYSERDA website. So we're not seeing new questions come in, or any new questions come in. We'll filter through to see if there's some other, try to see if we can address any other ones that come in, but please do add those in. There's one question that came in about the modeling of the community adder. I don't know if we want to go into that, related to whether or not the federal income tax credit drop at the end of 2021 was calculated into that. Max or Luke, I don't know if there's anything to add on that topic.
Yeah, I'll say we looked at the rates, a number of different ways. We spoke with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of financiers, a lot of developers, a lot of trade groups. We landed on those rates accounting for all the currently known market intelligence. Those are the rates we're going with for now. We're not going to readjust those rates at this time.
Thanks, Luke. And I can confirm when we can do notification when the webinars are uploaded to our website. So I'm not seeing we're not seeing new questions to go in here, and so I want to thank again our industry colleagues for participating in this webinar, and thank you all for joining. We're very excited to announce these changes that we have planned for our commercial industrial program. We also would encourage those who are interested in participating in the residential and non-residential program, and those who are interested in those low to moderate income incentives that we've made changes to join the webinar that will be in about 50 minutes or so. And so I guess with that, I believe that would conclude our webinar for this afternoon. And thank you all for joining.